No, nothing's coming out.
Well, now you've got it on play.
Record and play.
Well, what do you want to do? You want to...
There's so many things that I'd like to say, but it's kind of hard to bring it out because every time you start talking about it and thinking, it brings back memories that you just tried for 55 years to forget. So I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I'm going to give it a try. This is October 12th. Sorry it's taken so long, but here goes nothing. You know, it's been such a long time since I've been there that I'm going to forget a lot of things, and they may not be in the right order. But like I said, you try and forget these things, so when you're trying to think about them, the bad parts want to skip you. And the good parts, which weren't too many of them are the ones that you can talk about and laugh about. It all started when I was back in Sheboygan. As a young kid, kids get into trouble, and I was one of them, and they kept calling you up to go into the service, and we had to go to Milwaukee to get tested, you know, physically and mentally and all of this stuff. And the guy that signed your papers, whether you were accepted or rejected, he used to be our next door neighbor when I first came to Sheboygan. And the first time I got to camp, being that I was into that trouble, when I got to his desk, he looked at me and he said, "Hey bud, do you really want to go?" I said, "No, not really." So he stamped on my papers, rejected. And then you take them to the next desk, and they looked at you and, you know, figured, what is this? But as long as he put that stamp on there, you were rejected. So you got sent back home. The first time I got sent back, I think it took 2 or 3 months before they called me up again. And then I went back to Milwaukee and got all that checking and everything and exams. Got to John's desk and he looked at me and he said, "Hey bud, you're back. You want to go or you want to stay home?" I said, "I want to stay home," because I had a pretty good job. I was working in a brewery at that time. And he says, "Okay," so he stamped reject on there and I went home. But then after that, every month I had to go back to Milwaukee and get checked, and they'd mess around with you, and then John would finally stamp that thing reject. And I don't know, it was close to a year that I messed around that way, and it got to the point where nobody that I knew that was my age was left in Sheboygan anymore. They were all gone, and the ones that were there weren't guys that I would ever care to hang around with. I hope you know what I mean. But so the next time I went, I talked to my mom, and I told her, you know, I said, "I think I'm going to go." And she says, "Well, that's up to you." So when I got to Milwaukee, they finished messing with me, and I got to John's desk, and he said, "Well," I said, "I think I'm going to go." He just laughed and stood up and shook my hand. He says, "I knew you'd go one day." So I had to go then, but it took, I don't know, I think a month, maybe 5 or 6 weeks. Then they called me and said I had to go, and I had to get a bus early in the morning at the draft board, and they took us to Milwaukee. And when we got to Milwaukee, they went into the train station, they loaded us all on a train and took us to Camp Grant in Rockford. Unbeknownst to us, we didn't know where we were at or what was going on. But after we got there, they start dishing out bedding and that, and the snow started coming. And I'll tell you, we had the awfulest snowstorm. You couldn't hardly get around it. They had enough soldiers there that they could, you know, shovel by hand, and they cleaned out the place. And And the second day, they start giving us better physicals. And then they start issuing us our full uniforms that we had to have. And I think it was the third day they called us out about 4:30 in the morning, and before you can ever leave a post, you have to have a physical, which they call the short arm inspection. And all you had was a raincoat and shoes. And I tell you, it was so cold that morning when we got out there, and then that old rubber raincoat hanging on you, it was like you was in a freezer. But you walked into this little building and there was a doctor there, and he checked you out to see if you had any venereal diseases or anything. And then you went on the other side and you went back to your barracks. We went in and ate breakfast. They took us to the train station, loaded us on a train, and away we went. And we was on that train, I don't know, I think it was 4 days. And we landed in the middle of the night again, where we were coming to. Got out, and I don't know, you couldn't see what you were on, but it sure seemed like you was on, like on the ocean. And everybody got off of that train, and here they had them big army trucks waiting, blacker than the ace of spades. And we all got into those big 6-bys, they call them, big 2.5-ton trucks, and just a little bench on each side, and that's what they hauled the troops around in. And they drove us to where we were supposed to be, and we got in. Says, okay, you can go to bed. Didn't even get laying down in a sack, and all of a sudden, hear reveille sound. Everybody had to get up and get out and do calisthenics and run about a mile around the barracks there. And then you went in and you ate breakfast, came out, and by that time the sun was just coming up. And we looked, and there was the most beautiful green grass and flowers all over that place. We were in Camp Callan, that was down at San Diego, California. And I'll tell you, you talk about someone being surprised after leaving a big snowstorm. That was one of the happiest days of my life when we got out there, because I had never been to California, often threatened to go there, but could never get the guts to go. But then I don't know what they called it at that time, our orientation, they just start talking to you and telling you this, and then getting you acquainted with the Army life, that you had people above you, and boy, you better listen or you got nothing but dirt. So after about a week or two, where you got acclimated to what was going on, you finally found out what was going on. And it was kind of nice. That was where we started our basic training. We were right on a cliff. Our Camp Callan was located, the main highway, I think it was Highway 1 at that time, that went along the coast. We were right to the west of that highway, and the first 100, 200 feet from that highway into our camp was straight, but after that it was nothing but going downhill all the way down till you got to the ocean. And that's what you had to run up and down every day, and you did your calisthenics there, and you did your basic training running up and down them hills and walking them cliffs. And finally, where we got to the point where we could do something to learn something other than getting your body accustomed to what was going on, then they start issuing us rifles, and you go out to the firing range and you shot. Well, first it took you about 2 weeks with all of the training you had to have to learn how to shoot that gun and how to put the strap around your arm so it would be steady, because when you shot that rifle, you didn't shoot at something that was 10 feet from you. You had to shoot 1,500 feet down the line. So you had to keep that gun steady in order to hit the target you were shooting at. But eventually you got to know what you were doing, and it worked out pretty good. I acclimated to that thing pretty good. I was a pretty good shot. I became an expert marksman, and it's the old Army boys that were there that were putting us through basic, they didn't think too much of that, because you either had to be a hillbilly or a guy from New York that was one of these mafia guys in order to be able to fire a gun. But it worked out all right because I was big and I didn't have to worry too much about somebody picking on me. Other than the little guy, they always got to test the big guy. So one thing led to the other, and then, I don't know, we were there for, I think it was 13 or 14 weeks, and what they called the zoot suiters back in that era had come to San Diego and to Los Angeles, and they were tearing up the town. They had, if you can look back in history and see what thing they had them stovepipe pants, real baggy but tight at the ankle, real big deep pockets, and they had these big gold chains that they used to swing around that was hooked to their vest and their pants. But most of those guys were armed. They were Mexicans or Spaniards, whatever you want to call them, but out there we always called them Mexicans. And they started getting rougher and rougher. Well, our outfit had just completed all of our training with the firearms. So they sent us in, and we went into San Diego, which was close to Tijuana, the Mexican border. And these guys were going crazy, and there was some general, he must have been up in San Francisco because he wasn't anywhere near where we were. All we did, we had to put bayonets on our rifles, which was normal procedure, and he says no live ammunition. So our company commander went along with this, and here all of us dummies didn't know nothing from nothing. We goes in there and try to quell these guys, and you got a bayonet on the end of your rifle, but these zoot suiters are standing 50, 60 feet away from you. Well, you can't hit them with that 3-foot rifle, and they were peppering us with these 22s. So we got the order to pull back, and we went back and reconnoitered that back where we were supposed to be. But in your uniform, you always had what they called a bandolero, and you had a ammunition belt, and you had bullets for your rifle. And when we got back, then our captain says, okay, he said, we'll just spread out. We had gone in the shape of a V to break them up. And he says, okay, he says, we're going to open up a little bit, he says, so that we don't get more than one guy hit with them bullets. But he says, we'll run in. Well, when they were messing with my life, I thought, that's enough of this stuff. So I talked to a couple of the guys that were close to us in this V, and we all had our, our bandoleros on and our cartridge belt, where you had the bullets in that belt. And I told these guys, we had an M1 rifle. I told these guys, I said, I'm loading mine up, and the first guy I see shooting, I'm shooting back. And boy, a bunch of these other guys, because we was under fire, and we didn't have nothing to fire back. So everybody loaded up. And there was 3 wedges that were going in against these zoot suiters. Well, ours was the middle wedge, and then the one to the right of us, we were the ones that had been discussing this, and we were the ones that loaded up. And the outfit that was to our left flank, they just maintained the same thing. They had just the bayonets and no ammunition in their rifles. Well, we went in for the second offense, and when we got in there, these guys started shooting at us, and we opened up. Needless to say, there was quite a few of the zoot suiters that got killed. And after we massacred them, we didn't have no more trouble with the zoot suiters. But myself and another guy, at that time, I was an acting sergeant, just a buck sergeant. I was a 3-stripe sergeant. And after the skirmish was all over with, then this general from wherever he was from, they court-martialed me and 3 other guys that they claimed were instigators, and we didn't follow orders. So when we got up for the court-martial, they would appoint an attorney for you, which was nothing but a dummy in your outfit that maybe read a law book that says, well, they got to read you your rights or something. But we didn't pay no attention to that. And when we got in for the trial, they were questioning these people and questioning them. And then they finally came to me and they wanted to know because they said I was an instigator of putting live ammunition in our rifles. And I said, well, I didn't know if I was an instigator. But I said, if somebody was shooting at, this was that prosecuting attorney supposedly to be, and I said, if somebody is shooting at you, I says, and you have an opportunity to shoot back, I says, except some dummy that's 300 miles from here tells you can't do that, I said, what are you going to do? Well, then they said I was out of order and this and this and that. But it kept going, and then I just would not shut my mouth, and I kept going and going and going. And they threatened to get the guards to pull me out of there. And I finally got one of those, there was 4 officers up on the bench. Instead of one judge, they had 4 of them up there. And finally one of these guys, it must have sunk in what I was trying to say, that if somebody's going to shoot at you, and we are soldiers, and we're out there to quell this disturbance that these zoot suiters were doing, why the hell couldn't we shoot back at them? And then when he asked this question to these other judges, they took a little recess, and then they came back and they said, well, I had just disobeyed a direct order. And then I asked them, well, who was the direct order from? And then they looked and they said, well, my captain. And my captain stood up and says, I was never given an order not to fire. He says, I was just told we shouldn't use live ammunition, but we should still carry it. So he says, that's the only order that I ever got. He says, that was relayed to these men. He says, it was not a direct order. So I thought, boy, that was pretty good. Well, they messed around for 3 days. And they finally found us 3 guys that, we didn't follow orders. It was not that we refused a direct order. It just says we didn't follow orders. So we were given 10 days confinement to our post, which was better than being put up in front of a firing squad for refusing a direct order. And that yokel that was so many miles away from us, that 350 or whatever it was, they transferred him and broke him down to a captain. So that's captain, lieutenant colonel, lieutenant major, lieutenant colonel, and then the brigadier general, which was about 10 ranks he lost. And I thought, boy, my old ass is mud from here on in. But it wasn't. They kind of recognized me as a person that should be respected. I was always a real good soldier until it came for that petty stuff that they were trying to pull on you. Then I would stand for my rights, and it was, it worked out pretty good for me. I thought it turned out good. Like I say, I was always a real good soldier till it came time for the piddle stuff. That I didn't go for that, and I made it understood that I wouldn't do it. A lot of times I would have a fight with some of the non-coms, which were above me. They were the real army men that were corporals and sergeants, and in order to save face for them, they'd always have to invite you out behind the barracks, and not in uniform. You just take your shirt off. You'd have your pants on, but just your shirt went off. And I had been able to take care of myself pretty well, and I would never refuse a challenge from me. Oh, there was many a time I got my old butt whooped, but I would just keep going and going and going until finally they learned that, well, he knows what he's talking about, let's just leave him alone, because I was a good soldier, and that's what counted. Well, I'm going to have to take a little break and have a swig of beer. Be right back. Hi, I'm back. I didn't need that big of a drink. Well, after that zoot suit affair, we were pretty well on our road to finding out what we were going to do in the Army. And the camp we were at Camp Callan there in San Diego, it was nothing but a basic training camp. So they shipped us out of there, and we went to Riverside, California, which was just down the road a piece from San Diego. And then they start putting us on different weaponry. They had, most of it was on the west coast out there was anti-aircraft or coastal artillery. Well, we got to Riverside, and it was worse than anything that you'd ever want to see in such a beautiful state as California. It had a lot of orange groves out there, and it was just beautiful country. And after we got settled in our barracks, they had a cold night come, and we didn't know what was going on, but it got kind of chilly that night, and they called us out about 1:30 in the morning, and here we had to go out to all of these orchards and light what they call salamander tanks. They were just, it had fuel oil in the base of it, and it had a chimney coming up, and you'd light that fuel oil, and most of it would be smoke that would come out, but it would stop the frost from forming on all these orange trees and all the fruit trees they had out there. But we did that for about 2 months because this was the cold season out there. And I couldn't believe that they put us through this training to go out there and take care of these millionaires that had these big orchards and go out and light those furnaces for them so that their fruit wouldn't freeze. Well, that's when I started carrying on. I thought, well, enough of this stuff. So when we get done with our training during the day, they were teaching us how to take apart and put together 30 caliber machine guns, 50 caliber machine guns, 40 millimeter anti-aircraft guns, and 90 millimeter aircraft guns. Well, when our day was done, I was gone. We had a PX that was, I don't know what you'd say, maybe about 4 or 5 blocks down from where our outfit was stationed. I'd go over there and I'd just drink beer, and then the rest of these yokels that weren't smart enough to go drink beer, they would have to go out and light these furnaces. After about 2 weeks of it, then our first sergeant caught me one night after we got done with chow, and I started heading for the PX, and he stopped me. He said, "Where are you going?" I told him. He says, "Well, he says, they've been calling us out every night." And I said, "That's why I'm gone." I says, "If I'm not here, they can't call me out." He looked at me and he laughed, and he said, "Hey, Shultz, that isn't too bad of a thing." So him and all the other non-coms from our outfit came along with me over to the PX. And when these other guys saw us going over towards the PX, because they knew what I was doing, but they were afraid to do it, they all came along with us. And here we sat, and when they called out our outfit to go light these furnaces, there was nobody there. We was all over in the PX. But none of the officers knew where we were. But the next morning they found out where we were, because half the guys were still drunk, and they told stories they weren't supposed to tell. So then they restricted us all to our area. You couldn't leave, so that when they sent the call out, you had to be there, and then you'd have to go light the furnaces. But after a while, I just get out there, and then there was a way, if you didn't watch how you lit them, you could make them blow up. So that's how I learned how to do that. I would light them the wrong way, and then run like hell. And about 10 seconds later, it would go kaboom, and here it would blow up. It maybe killed 1 or 2 trees next to it, but I thought, well, if we didn't have those things to light, we wouldn't have to do that no more. And some of the other guys finally, I told them what I was doing, and some of the other guys did the same thing. Before you know it, they didn't call the army out anymore to light them. They had to hire these illegal Mexicans that were in the States, and they'd have to go out and light them. Otherwise, they were getting this done for free because the army was doing it. Otherwise, they'd have had to pay those Mexicans their wages for going out there to do that. So after we got done with that, then I'm trying to think, we went from Riverside, we went to Camp Han, I think it was. And that was more training, I think, to get us to be for the anti-aircraft. Unbeknownst to us at that time, we didn't know that's what they were doing. But we got to Camp Han, and this is where the Air Force was located. And they used to pull these sleeves that were hooked on the back of airplanes, and then you would shoot at these sleeves. But they had a real long cable on them, and then that sleeve was behind them, and you had to shoot that sleeve to see how many times you hit it. You would always have to take your shell, if you were on a 30 caliber or a 50 caliber machine gun, you had to dip your rolls into this paint, and each gunner had his own color of paint, and you dip those bullets in there, and then when you load it in your rifle, the paint would be dry, but when it went through the barrel, it heated it up enough that by the time it got to that target, it would rub that paint off in that sleeve, and then after you got done firing at that pilot would fly overhead wherever you were at, and they had a release that would come out from the plane. It was a big iron ball, and it hit this clip on the end just where the sleeve was, and it would release that sleeve, and it would just fall down to where you were at from where you were shooting. And then they'd check that sleeve to see what color paint had gone through these sleeves. Well, I always had the most paint that was in these sleeves, because I don't know if it was just something that came to me naturally or what, because I had never practiced. I never had a machine gun to play with. But I could shoot, and I knew how to aim that gun to hit what I was shooting for. So that's when they start making me what they called acting non-com. Started out, at the time this went on, I was nothing but just a private. And they made me a corporal, because my next step would have been a PFC, private first class. But they made me a corporal. And then that gives you a little authority. You wore a band around your arm, your left arm, and it showed what rank you were. But everybody knew you was just either a butt kisser or you knew what you was doing. And I finally got to the point I didn't have to take any nonsense from anybody because of my size. And I was never afraid of anybody. Like I say, I got my butt whooped many a time. But the guy I was with that whooped my butt, he would never try it again because he got stung a few times that he didn't forget. So as this firing went on and on and on, they kept promoting me to a higher acting non-com. And then I had to still learn what to do with the 40 millimeter and the 90 millimeter, because each outfit in the anti-aircraft, you had the machine guns and you had the 40 millimeter and the 90 millimeter, because the 40 millimeter would get up to get the fighter planes, but the 90 millimeters would shoot high enough to get these bombers. But that wasn't my bag. That was not to stand there and load ammunition or fire, because everything when you fired from them was not eyesight. It was all run by these radars. But the machine gun, you had to actually fire it with your eyesight to see what you were hitting. After I got acclimated to this machine gun, every fourth or fifth shell you put into your belt on a 50 caliber gun was what they call a tracer. When it would leave the barrel, it would be like a phosphorus ball that would come out so you could see where your trajectory was going to hit the target you were looking at. But while we learned how to shoot, we had these air drone planes that they had, that some guy that was sitting right behind you where you were shooting, he was flying this just like they do today with these radio control planes. And as soon as he would see those tracers getting close to his airplane that he was flying there, they had, I don't know, it was about a 12, 15 foot wingspan. It was, kind of a good sized target. But they could see where your tracers were going, and they would dip or doodle that plane, and you could never hit it. So I got smart one day, and I just thought I'd try it. So instead of having every fourth or fifth shell with a tracer on it, I put mine in at 20. And the first day we went out there for practice, this cocky guy that was the control man for the plane behind me, he used to always goof me because he could see where the bullets were going, and he would dipsy doodle to get away from me. I couldn't hit it. So when I loaded up, we got ready for that thing, and he started flying out in front. And I opened up, and I had a real good eyesight for mine, for where I could look through what we had for the target. And I shot that thing, and it wasn't about the second blast. I hit that plane, and it blew. It's supposed to see as soon as you hit the plane, there was a trapdoor that would open up on that plane, and a parachute would come up, and it would float down to the ground. But I had picked out where that trapdoor was. That's what I wanted to hit, and I hit that, and it blew that gizmo apart. And when that plane came down, it wasn't worth for nothing because I had just tore it up. And then they made me change that on the firing range. I had to go back to every fourth or fifth, but I just refused to shoot it that way. I said I was the one that was doing what I had to do to save my life. And finally, my captain says he's right. He says he can shoot like he wants. He says there's nothing in the book that says he has to have every fourth or fifth one a tracer. So then these guys that were controlling the planes, they refused to send one up for me because I was just going to kill it. So then so I was training these guys how to shoot, but they always had to have the fourth or fifth tracer bullet in it because, I don't know, it must have been God looking over me that told me that this is how you shoot it and what you do, and that's what I had done. But when these rookies that I was trying to teach, I'd show them how to do it, but they had to have it every fourth or fifth because they were looking through this gun sight and then watching their tracers to try and get to where they wanted to go. And mine just came natural to me. I just got out there and got them. Okay, after that we went from Camp Han, we went to Monterey, I think it was. And that was, they were giving us training for beach landing so that we could get in with our equipment. And I had progressed far enough that I was on the 50 caliber machine gun, which was water cooled. Well, it was a heavy dude. You couldn't carry that to go in for a landing. But you could carry the 30 caliber machine gun that had that little tripod on the front of out at the end of the barrel that you would stick on the ground, and you could twist it any way you wanted, up or down, to fire with that 30, because when you land it, you didn't have the strength to carry them big 50 calibers in. So after we got training with it, and we were in Monterey, it got so that I really knew what I was doing with that. The only thing, I was better with the 50 than I was with the 30. Because the 30, I think it must have been every third had the tracer in it, and sometimes I think they put every one was a tracer. The tracer still could kill. That's not the thing. The only thing is the tracer had that phosphorus on the outside so that you could see where you were shooting. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, but I mean, I can visualize what's going on here. And if you have any questions after this is all over with, either write me a letter or call or send email, whatever you want, and I'll try and help you out. I'm going to take a pause. Back again. Well, after we got through there, then they shipped us back down south, and we went to it was Needles, California. It was out on the Mojave Desert. That was, it should have been a warning sign to anybody that was there. It's out in the middle of the desert. It got hotter than the Hades out there in the daytime, and at night you couldn't get enough clothes to put on so you didn't stand there and freeze. It was worse than Sheboygan when it got to 20, 30 below zero. You could stand that cold better than you could stand that when it would get down to about 35, 40 on the desert, because your blood was so thin from during the day. The temperature used to get up to 120, 130 during the day. We had, in fact, all the tents that they had out there, that they were what they call 6-man tents. They were built up on a frame. They had one of these kerosene heaters in all of these tents. And at night they'd put them on, and it used to get so that the guys would take one tent, they'd take the stove out of that tent and bring it over to the tent next to them. And they'd have 2 heaters in there, and then they'd have 12 guys in that tent, because it used to get so cold at night. But anyhow, it was for jungle training. That's, I think, they were getting us ready for, because that's where I wound up after we got situated. But it was kind of a fun deal, other than being so hot and cold. But we were fortunate. There was like a mountain right out, I would say it was to the west of us, where this mountain was, and these coyotes used to howl all night long, and it was such an eerie sound, you couldn't sleep at all. And then you'd have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and do all this training and, calisthenics and everything. It used to almost kill you. Then you'd stand guard duty at night because, you didn't have bullets in your gun at night, when you were out, these outfits there. Because it was only to teach you how to stay awake while you were on guard duty. So when we got, there was a searchlight outfit right next to us. And we got to messing around one day, and I talked to one of these guys from the searchlight outfit, and I said, hey, I says, you guys, I see you do practice at night, but I says, you're always up in the air, I says, looking for airplane. I said, when you hear those coyotes, I says, what would be wrong with you guys putting your lights on the mountain base? And I said, we'll shoot the damn things with our 50s. And this guy laughed, and he said, I'm going to try it with our lieutenant. And their lieutenant was just as crazy as our lieutenant. I had told our lieutenant what I thought we would do, and he agreed on it. So the next night after that, them coyotes start howling, and all of a sudden this big searchlight goes on, and he lit up that mountain like it was daylight out there. There was 4 50 calibers in our outfit. We had them all lined up. We were in gun position, and we started shooting. We must have got 30 of those dudes that night. The next night, same thing happened. The only thing is some of the civilians from Needles, California, must have got a hold of the Army, and boy, they raised heck, and we had to quit shooting them. But we didn't have too much trouble after that with those coyotes, because we had kind of wiped out that herd that was in there. Well, Graham and Karen just came home, and I got to quit talking, but I'll get back at this real quick. Bye. I'm back. I just messed up. I've talked for 2 hours, and I had it on the wrong thing. I had it on play instead of record. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know if I can remember it all again or not. Here goes nothing. After we had got through with the desert training out there, when we learned how to kill coyotes, we came in and they kept sending us up and down the west coast. We'd go from Tijuana, Mexico, we'd go all the way up to Palo Alto, California. And I think the only reason we went up there was because our captain was from there. And we'd go up, and every time we get up there, he'd go visit his family, and nobody else could visit nobody. But that's where the Army was. Well, after we got this thing all situated, then we found out what was going on, and we said, I was just checking the tape player, so if I repeat myself, I'm sorry. But we found we'd get up and down the coast, and then as we would get to places, they would stop, and then we would fire, as they call, coastal artillery. Instead of anti-aircraft, we would be firing coastal artillery. We were supposed to be learning how to do that so our guns would be available for either defense that we needed. Well, as you would go, then the first 2 trips we made, we had these highway blockages where it was either, just a minor earthquake, or you'd have rain and a mudslide would come, and all this stuff would come down and block the highway. So after that second trip, they finally sent along a bulldozer, the front of the pack and the back of the pack. And being as dumb as we were, we figured, what is going on here? But well, this is what the Army does. So as we would go, if the front bulldozer got through before the slide came, he would start digging out from that side. And the bulldozer on the back, which is, by the way, they were what they call D16s. They were big diesel bulldozers, and man, they could move a mountain. But you took the one in the front, if he got through, he would come back, clean it from that end, and the one in the back would clean it from this end and clean up. Because you never got a big section of highway that was ever blocked. It was, maybe 100, 150 feet, maybe even sometimes 200 feet. But they would get that, and they had a bulldozer in the front and a bulldozer in the back. And if we would get to a place where before the first bulldozer got there, there was a blockage. Then the two of them would come in, and man, it wouldn't take them nothing to get that highway all opened up again. But after we found out what was going on, we thought, boy, this is pretty nice stuff. And we'd be shooting out there. They'd stop, and we'd set up our equipment. We'd shoot. We didn't know if we were shooting at whales or if it was submarines or if it was a rock out there or what, because most of it was so far off you didn't know what you were doing. But anyhow, they finally got going, and then they said, well, okay, we have enough training. And they thought, well, we're ready to go overseas. So we got all loaded up, and we're headed out, and they said, well, we were all in suntan uniforms, and we figured, well, what the heck, we're going over to where it's warm. Well, we got out, and I think we were out the second day, and all of a sudden we headed north, and it started getting colder and colder and colder, and we thought, well, what the heck is this? And here we're only in suntans because all of our equipment is in the hold of these troop ships. We were on these victory ships with our equipment set up, because as you went over, no matter where you went when you were in a convoy, we would set up all of our equipment, the 40s and the 40 millimeter aircraft gun and a 50 caliber machine gun. And we would set them up on the decks of these victory ships so that we were the protection with the convoy besides what the Navy had there. And all of a sudden, when the weather got cold, and we thought, well, what the heck is going on? And there was only two of us ships and two naval ships that had pulled out of this big convoy. And it got colder and colder and colder, and finally we got to where I guess is what we were supposed to be at. And we got that. I don't know who had come up with it, but somebody had said we were in Alaska. I couldn't believe it because we were all in suntans, but finally we got to, well, our first stop was, I found out after a while, was Kiska Island. The only reason I found out that was because there was some Seabees there. And they were on the east side of the island. And when we landed, we got in, and we didn't have any clothes, all just them suntan uniforms. And the Seabees were good enough to kind of help us out, and they gave us some of their winter clothes, and we put them on, and we finally moved out, and we moved east on Kiska, and we finally got the island secured, got all those Japs out of there, and got them, well, that was my first kill. It's not nice to admit, but that was mine. I'll never forget it. I don't think as long as I live. It's something that a person doesn't really want to go through. I'd hate like hell to be killed, because you don't know what it's going to be. But it was either him or me. And I believe it took me 2 days before I could even shoot my gun again. This was my machine gun that I was using. So there was nothing much left of that guy. But after about the second day, it finally dawned on me, well, he was trying to kill me. I just was lucky, and I got him first. So after that, it just got to, well, when you see something, shoot, get rid of it. Because if you don't, he's going to get rid of you. So we finally got Kiska cleared out, and then we had these, I don't know what, I think they call them landing barges. They were just little ships that they had, little, like a little speedboat, except they were a little bigger than that. They were made out of iron so that they couldn't shoot you with machine guns or something, or rifle fire. And after we got through with Kiska, we got onto those little ships and went over to Atu, which is just an island a little bit west of Kiska. They're about next door neighbors. But we got into there and we cleaned that one out, and the killing became more but the killing became easier as you went along. And by the time we got through with that too, I thought, well, boy, I'm an old army dog now. Wouldn't take much. But I think we were up there, it was about 4 weeks, maybe 5 weeks at the most. And they finally shipped us out and they sent us over to Oahu, which is in the Hawaiian Islands. We didn't know where we were going till we got there. And on this big clock tower, it said on there, Oahu. So we knew where we were at. And after we landed, and we got in there, and here there was only the A and C batteries that had gone up to Alaska, and those couple naval ships that we went up there. All the rest of our battalion had already gone to Hawaii, and they were at Oahu. And when they finally landed and we got sent out to where they were located, we got there and these old dogs thought they were better than nothing. And they treated us like dirt when we got there, and it was still our same battalion that we had been with in the States. But after we got there and we finally got things straightened out, and you can imagine there's little knuckle sandwiches going back and forth because these guys, they know so much more than you did. But once you've been into some real combat, you'd be surprised how strong you can become. It's not because of the killing, it's because of what you have done. You have helped somebody get freed. And this, I think, is what stuck with me all the rest of my days that I was in the service. As long as you were doing what you were supposed to be doing, you were freeing somebody. And it helped. After we got all straightened out on Oahu, we started setting up, and they sent us out to, I forget the name, it was on the other end of the Hawaiian Islands. I think, let's see, it would be the northwest, it would be directly north of Diamond Head. It was, if I remember correctly, it was Kahuka that we were at. And I had the spot where I could tell you what it was, but I don't know where it went. But I'll get there. Bear with me a bit. I don't know where it went. But anyhow, it was on the other end from Diamond Head was where we were at, and they set us up for jungle training. And after we got set up, we figured out, boy, this is not really what jungle training is all about, because we had been up in the Aleutians, and that's not jungle up there. But boy, there surely was some different things. So as we got to look at what was going on and what they wanted us to do, my first sergeant and he was a first lieutenant. We got in there for the first part of this training. And I told the lieutenant, I said, I thought they were full of baloney, the way things were going. And I said, this isn't the way that a guy would actually do this. So as we got going, I told him what I thought we ought to do with these people that were there at Oahu that were giving us this jungle training. So I showed him what I thought we ought to do. And him and the first sergeant both said, okay, let's try it. So when we went out for our first foray the next day, we did what we thought we ought to do. And it wasn't, I would say, a half an hour, 45 minutes. We had this so-called elite group that we had surrounded, had them captured. We had, you didn't have live ammunition when you were doing all this stuff. You just had blanks, or you just, you had observers that were watching you, and you would say, okay, I got you, you got this one. And finally, when it would come all through, we wound up, we had those guys, what they call sucking hind something. And when it was all over with, then the major, the officer from the elite group that was there that was trying to give us this jungle training, finally came over and he admitted, because we had talked to him first and said, that we didn't think this was right. But as we got there, and he said, well, I think you guys are right. So he said, okay, he says, let's try it this way. So we did. We just went on and on and on. And they finally come over and they said, hey, you guys are right. So my captain called me out in front of everybody that next day we had and said, that you were giving me a condemnation that said, hey, this guy knows what he's talking about. And I said, well, it was the first sergeant and the lieutenant that had agreed upon this stuff. We had talked this over ourselves. So they said, well, okay, so they gave the whole outfit this from our captain that said, okay, everybody deserves this. It came out, everybody felt good about it. So we stayed and we helped with the training of the troops that were coming in, and we would work and work and work, and we finally come out and we made something good out of it. Well, after we found out what we were doing, they start shipping us out, and they said, well, we're going to move ahead. We think you guys are smart enough to know what's going on. So I think you never knew when you were in the service where you were going to go. They would just say, well, this is Hill 19, or this is Beachhead so-and-so, and whatever was going on. But as things progressed and you got to, and you could talk to some of the Navy people when you were riding on their ships, it came to the point that we found that our first thing that we left from out of Oahu, we went over to the Gilbert Islands. And our first landing was Tarawa. And we thought we knew something when we left Hawaii, but when we got to Tarawa, we didn't know nothing. We were dumber than a box of rocks. But we finally got it pinpointed to what we were doing. We finally got them annihilated and got them run out. There's hundreds of islands all around there. They had transportation, which we didn't have, but we did annihilate them on Tarawa, and they had quite a few casualties. And we went to Macon, which was, I don't know, maybe half a day, 3/4 of a day north of Tarawa. And we got in there, and they must have heard what was going on, because most of them were gone. What was left got rid of them, and they locked up all the civilians because they didn't know if they were civilians or if they were the Japs. Then we went to Kwajalein, which is in the Marshalls, and that was a little tougher than what Tarawa was, because it was a little more fortified. They had better equipment there. And we finally got that one straightened out. We went to Inuitak, which is, if you remember, that was some of the places where they dropped their test groups for the A-bomb and where they set off some of those explosions. Then we went to the Marianas from there. We hit into Saipan. And we was north of Guam. We never did get into Guam. My brother got there, which was years later. But we had gone into Saipan and got it straightened out. And we went from there, we headed for the Philippines. And we thought, boy, this is going to be something, because you didn't know if you were fighting the Filipinos or if you were fighting the Japs or what it was. So when we came in, we were supposed to go into Manila, but as we got there, something came up and they says, well, Manila was almost cleaned out, and so was Luzon. So they shipped us down to Leyte, and we landed on Leyte. And I'll tell you, it was, I would imagine it was 3-4 months. We had our stuff all full. You couldn't do nothing there. It was so well fortified. But we finally did get them cleaned out. And after we got them fixed up, then it came time for the big push. We were in the largest convoy that ever was, well, I don't know what you'd call it, but was ever assembled. And there was, when I got off of the ship at Leyte to get onto one of those victory ships, which we call them, so we could set up our equipment, I had more sea duty time than the actual sailors that were on that ship that we got onto. We always had a little saying that I wore out more socks than you have had days in the Navy. But they were good fellows. They really were. We appreciated everything that they had done. And after we got going, we got to Okinawa. And we were supposed to land on Okinawa, and after we got there, they figured out that there was a more dangerous force south of Okinawa, and they sidetracked us from where we were and shipped us down to Aishima. And this time our whole battalion went in. We landed on Aishima. We got them straightened out, what we thought was right. It's an island that's real flat. There was 4 airstrips on there, 4 runways, I guess you'd call it. And you could get bombers in there, you could get fighter planes, you could get anything you wanted in there. And we finally found out what we were going to do when we got in there, and one end of the island, it was the northwest corner of the island, was like an ice cream cone sticking up. And we thought, boy, this is something that's odd. How do these planes get in and out? Because 2 of the runways headed directly to that ice cream cone. But after we got to doing what we were, we could find out why that thing was there. Those planes would take off and land. They would come in from one side and they'd head for that ice cream cone, and they would veer to the left or to the right, depending upon which runway they were on. And they got off there, and we finally got the island secured. And always of an evening, we would have casualties. Couldn't figure out where they were coming from, it was small arms fire. You could tell the difference between if it was a machine gun or if it was just a rifle, or if they had them silenced or what. Not really silenced. I don't think they had silencers at that time, but they had them where you couldn't see the gunpowder going when they fired. So finally, we got up next morning and we sent out a recon patrol to go out, and because you could always see the people that were being shot seemed like they were coming from that ice cream cone. So we all went out there. We had 2 batteries that went up, and that's about 200 men. We went up and we scoured that ice cream cone. And my God, there was so many of these tunnels and passageways going in there. We got in and we finally found a hospital that you couldn't believe how well equipped that thing was. Just spotless, all stainless steel stuff, and the biggest operating room you ever wanted to see. And finally got in there and got it secured. But then you'd always lose men because they were coming from all different parts of that ice cream cone. So I finally said, well, there's only one way to get this thing done. So we took flamethrowers and went in there. And, well, by the way, I want to back up a little bit here because we're to the point where I got too far ahead of myself. When we landed on Aishima, the second day we were there, we had a typhoon. And it was, you could feel the wind was picking up, the rain was picking up, and there was no place to go. We set up a couple 6-man tents. One was for headquarters and one was for supply. And the wind kept blowing, and we had these telephone cables. They're just little wires. And we had them hooked around these tent posts. And it kept snapping them. So we finally put about 2-inch diameter of these cables and hooked them around the 4 corners of the tent. And then we did the same thing up on the peak of that tent and run them 4 lines down, about 2-inch diameters. And when that next day after we got up, in the meantime, after we found out how bad that wind was coming, we found these graves. It looks like a woman's legs, and with her private parts in there, there's a stone. It's, I imagine 20 inches wide by 3 feet high, and you could pull that out. That was supposed to be her, for birthing. And we pulled that stone out of there, and here inside, in all these urns, are bones, and there's little wood boxes. They're about half as big as our caskets because they put the dead people in that box, and they fold up their legs all the way up to their chest, and they fold our arms across the chest so that they only need about 3 foot long for their body to be in there. And as the skin in that deteriorates, those bones that are left, the next time they bury somebody, when they go in there, if those bones are bad enough, then they take them and put them in these, maybe 3 foot high urns that are in there. And each one is there, and it's marked for whoever that is, and those bones go into that one. Well, when we found out what was in there, we just pulled everything we could out of it. First we opened them up, and then we took the flamethrower and shot it in there to burn all the bugs and everything that was in there, burn that out of there. And after it kind of cooled down a little bit, we went in there, and then we moved all the urns out and took them out, and we stayed in there while that typhoon hit. And about a day and a half later, when the wind finally subsided, we went outside, and here, these victory ships, the ones that we had come in on, were up about 150 yards up onto the land. And there was one troop carrier. There was, it must have been at least 100 yards up onto the island. And you know how much water they take, and man, that thing was laying up there. You couldn't believe what it was. There was no more troops on it. They had already landed on Okinawa. But after we got it all cleaned up there, we were the ones that had saved ourselves because we went into those graves. It doesn't sound like it's such a good thing to do, But that's what saved all our lives while we were on there. Then after we finally got situated there, we got Aishima secured. They had finally got into Okinawa and got most of it secured. But as the tide went out, you could walk from Aishima over to Okinawa. It was, I don't know, half a mile at the most. And then when the tide came in, it was way over your head. You could sail a ship through that where the water was. So it got to the point that when they were trying to secure Okinawa, and we already had Aishima secured, all these yokels from Okinawa were coming across when the tide was out. They'd walk across there and come over and they'd get into that ice cream cone. So we finally found out what they were doing, I don't know, it was about a week. And we set up our perimeter out there where they could walk across that water. And as they were coming out, we had the searchlight, throw their lights on them, and we just cut them down like you were cutting grain. Because if you took captive, you had to pull guard duty. And that's one thing you never wanted to do, was to have to pull guard duty after you fight all day long. And then you figure, well, I could get maybe an hour or two sleep at night. And here you got to sit up and watch these yokels you got in a circle. And their life didn't mean nothing to them. They were all for the emperor. They could, we die, this is for the emperor. So them guys, they'd try and escape at night. They'd try during the daytime. They'd antagonize you so that, because they felt they were better off dead, they wouldn't lose face. So it got kind of tough at the end, and we just said, well, it's not that we wanted to do this. It was for our own benefit. We just did not take prisoners anymore. That, according to the Geneva Conference, I guess that's the wrong thing to do, but when you're out there, you're fighting for your own life, and you're trying to get an hour's sleep, you could care less what the Geneva Conference said, because they were treating you the same way. They got American prisoners, and they cut limbs off, they tortured them, they used heat on them, starved them, beat them. We at least just killed them and saved them the mercy. But after we got everything secured, then they started bringing troops back in. And one day I was sitting up on that, just near the base of that ice cream cone, maybe 100 feet up, and I had my machine gun set up there. And to my left, which would be to the north, I heard this explosion, looked down, and here Ernie Pyle and his driver were driving down on the plateau down below, and that was a 37 millimeter gun that them Japs had, and he fired, and he hit that Jeep dead center. It blew that Jeep up, it got the driver, and it got Ernie Pyle. He was that, what do you call him, a journalist. He wrote all these things during the World War, even Europe, and then he came over to the Pacific, and he wrote all these little tidbits about what the guys were doing. He interviewed us. But he got killed over there, and they built a little monument for him. I don't know if they ever moved it out of there and brought him to Indiana, because when everything was done over there, they finally moved us out from Aishima and took us over to Okinawa, because we had quite a few hot spots to pick up over in Okinawa, around Naha. So they shipped us over there, and then I got to be I had already qualified as a gunner in an airplane on a B-24 and a B-17, aerial gunner they called it at that time. The only thing is, I was too tall, I was too big to be into the Air Force as a gunner, but I did qualify for it, because whenever we landed or anything, our first objective was always to secure an airstrip so our planes could get in and out to bring supplies. And I had qualified as an aerial gunner, and when the time came when the A-bomb was dropped, on Hiroshima, 2 days after it was dropped, I was able to go up on a B-19 to go as a tail gunner, because you had to have all the gunners on there. And this pilot said it was okay if I went because one of the gunners couldn't make it. I don't know if he's sick or what, but I went up. And I flew over Hiroshima the second day after the A-bomb, and it looked like there was soot over that whole thing. And came back, and I didn't think I'd ever get over that, because there was nothing down below. The buildings were just flattened out. There was nothing, no vegetation, no nothing. It was just like soot that covered that whole place. And then right after that, then they got, what was it, Nagasaki, I guess was the name of that, the second one they dropped. And that's when the war ended. And I was there when they brought those Japs in for that peace treaty where they surrendered. They landed them on Okinawa at Naha, and I was on the airstrip with my machine gun, because we didn't trust them then either. We thought they was pulling some kind of a trick. But then they landed, there was two of that, we call them Betty bombers, and they landed, two of those planes, and they took all of them. There was a couple shots fired when they unloaded those Japs, and it was our troops that had fired. Could you imagine fighting over there for 3 years and going through the atrocities and everything that you had, and then to have these yokels come over and put on a big show and say we're this and we're that, and none of the Japs were ever hit, but our troops did fire on them. Just some crazy yokel fired his rifle. But they finally got him, and they took him out. I think it was the Missouri, a battleship. They took him out from Okinawa, from Naha, and they took him out on a boat, took him out to the big ship, the Missouri. They signed that treaty. So it came time to come home, and I came to get aboard that ship. I was supposed to be on the first boat coming out of Okinawa to go back to the States. And I'm standing there at the end of the gangplank, and the guy said, "Shultz." I says, "Arthur R." And he said, "Red line." I had to stand on the side, and after they got the whole ship loaded, I asked him, I said, "What's the problem?" He says, "You got bad time." I said, "Yeah, but I said I can make that up stateside." "No," he says, "that isn't the way the Army works." He says, "You make it up here." So I thought, boy, this is something. So I thought, well, they'd, make me wait for a week or two, and then they go. But I came to every day. I would come to that. There was like a theater there, and I come every day, and they'd call Shultz, and I'd walk up to where the gangplank was, and I'd say Arthur R, and he'd say red line. So after about a week of that, then I finally asked him, I says, "What the heck can I do?" He says, "Well," he says, "according to the record," he says, "you have 209 days of bad time to make up." And he says, "You will make it up here." I said, "No way I can get back stateside?" He said, "Nope." He's not till you got 209 days made up. So I says, "Must I come down here every day?" I says, "And take my chances?" He says, "Well, if I were you," he says, "that's what I would do." He said, "Because," he said, "the Army does do funny things." He says, "They may put you on that list and take you off the red line." So I used to come down every day and every day. I don't know, it was 2-3 months I'd come down every day. And finally he got sick of seeing me, and he says, "Well, where are you billeted?" Which means, where are you staying? And I said, "Well," I says, "I'm staying in this naval outfit." I says, "It's right around the corner here." I says, "They feed you a hell of a lot better than the Army does." I says, "and it's closer to the theater here." So I says, "I just bunk up over there." I said, "and then I come over here every morning." Well, he says, "I'll let them know at headquarters," he says, "if your name is not redline." I said, "Well, okay." But I didn't believe him, so every day I'd still come over there. But I would just stay back up in the theater, and they'd call Shultz, and nobody would answer them, and the colonel would say, red line, red line. So I found out, he was really a pretty good guy. So I stayed there, and 209th day, I come over there, because he had called headquarters, and he said, tell Art to get over there. So I went over there and called Shultz, and I said, Arthur R. He says, please step aboard. And I did. I got aboard that ship, and we finally took off, I don't know, the next day or the day after. I was just so glad to get on there, I didn't know what else to do. And we left, and about halfway we got between Okinawa and the west coast, and we hit a typhoon. And I'll tell you that we were on a troop ship, and I guess there was about 4 of us white guys other than some Navy personnel. But the troops, I think there was only 4 of us that were white. The rest was all the Quartermaster Corps, which was all African Americans at that time. And you could hear those guys praying and praying, and I was praying because that boat was tipping and tipping. And finally, the garbage cans were flying all over. You couldn't even lay in your fart sack. It was rocking so bad. And finally, after we pulled up and we went north to get out of that typhoon, because where you get over cold water, it kind of kills that typhoon. And it finally settled down, and the captain spoke on the loudspeaker. He said, we are allowed to list 58 degrees. He says, last night we listed 54 degrees. So 4 degrees is just a minute thing, but those 4 degrees could have tipped that boat upside down, and all of these people were on that boat, which I would imagine was 10,000, would have died. Because, it was cold up there, the wind, the rain. But it finally let us go, and we got back stateside, and we landed in Seattle, Washington. And I still had not learned my lesson after spending 209 days over in Okinawa, because in my earlier escapades in the service, part of my 209 days, we had gone from Riverside, California up to Tacoma, Washington. Warren, Lastly, and myself, we were AWOL, but we had furlough papers because we had a real good clerk from our outfit, and he gave us some fake furlough papers. But as we got up there, then his aunt saw us in this garage. It was a good buddy of his, and we was working in that garage trying to get money to go back down to Riverside. And his aunt saw us and turned us in. And MPs and the FBI came over and picked us up, and we were in, these monkey suits for the mechanics use. But his dad was the editor of the Tacoma Times. And I don't know how he did it, but he got the FBI to swear that we were in uniform when they picked us up, where the MP said, no, we were in civilian clothes. Because if that would have been the thing, that would have been desertion, because that was time of war. But all we got was we were AWOL. And they sent some guards up to get us from Riverside. And it was a gunnery man from our outfit and a clerk that had lived in Washington. So they got a 3-day furlough to come up and get us and bring us back. So they put us aboard the train to come back, and we were in handcuffs, and we got aboard the train, and the MP said, you got to take the handcuffs off while the train is moving. So we were real good soldiers. We didn't do nothing. And when we got to L.A., Warren and I had decided that we knew L.A. enough that when we got to that train station, we were going to take off like big birds and go. Because if we turned ourselves in to the gate, we wouldn't have to pay their transportation from Tacoma back to Riverside. We had to pay from Riverside up to Tacoma because they came to get us. So as soon as we hit LA, they were jostling around, and the train finally came in to stop. And these two guys, we were such good soldiers, these two guys, the sergeant and the corporal, they figured, well, what the heck, we're just going to come out and get on the bus and go to Riverside. So we got out and we disappeared. And we got a ride right after we got out of the train station to Riverside. We got an Army truck. Got in. We turned ourselves in at the gate and said that we lost our guards, and we wanted to turn us in because we didn't want them to feel that we were running away. We just lost them and we were there. So, oh man, they went crazy. They tried this, they tried that to, convict us of everything, but it didn't work. And because then there was 3 judges on the panel, they're all officers, and we had a dummy for a lawyer. So we told them we didn't do nothing. All we did is we lost them at the train station, and we came right back to camp. We turned ourselves in. We would be glad to pay their ticket from Tacoma to Riverside, but that judge, he was smart. He said, no, they don't have to pay that. He says, that's not the law. He says, they did not bring them in. These people turned themselves in. So we each got 6 months in the stockade. And I think we were there 2 weeks, possibly 3. And they wanted to ship us both overseas. But at that time, there was an edit out that if you were shipped overseas, you have to have a furlough first. So we didn't have a furlough yet, other than our own. So they had to pull both of us out of the guardhouse, and they shipped us home on furlough. And then that same corporal from our clerk, I got 2 sets of furlough papers from him. So after I went home, that's when I met my beautiful wife. And I came back. I didn't go back to camp. I went to San Francisco. My sister was a WAC, and she was on this debarkation point, and she would clear all these people to go overseas. So when I got to see her, she thought, because she had come down to see me when I was in Camp Callan, when I was in boot camp yet, and she thought that, knowing how bad I was, that I was AWOL. So I showed her my furlough paper, and I said, no, Jerry, I says, I've got papers. I says, I'm here on vacation. So she showed me all around San Francisco and everything, but every day I would call in to at the San Francisco base, I would call in to our commander, the corporal, the clerk at Riverside, and I'd say, is it? And he'd say no, because that was our key. So I didn't know. I was there almost 3 weeks, and I called, and he said, they just came through an hour ago. He says, you're going tomorrow morning. So I went out, told Jerry that I said I had to get back to camp. I said, I think we're going to move out. So she arranged for me to get on one of the Army convoys from San Francisco down to Riverside. So I rode in that thing all the way down, and I got in, and I turned myself in at the gate, and I said, who I was, and I said, I'm turning myself in. They sent guards over from our outfit, and they had their rifle, and they put me under gun control until 3 days later when we finally boarded that boat to go over. And that was just before we went up to Alaska. We were headed for Hawaii, but we got sidetracked to Alaska. So I guess that is about the end of my story. Maybe there's some things that I can, after you hear this tape, maybe I can talk to you, and maybe you can ask some questions and I can help you out a little bit. But other than that, I think that's about the end of her. Say hi to everybody. I love you. And this is your old granddad saying bye-bye. Hi, Hannah, it's Grandpa. I'm back. Grandma heard what these tapes are all about. Excuse me, and she didn't think that I was telling enough of the story that you really wanted to hear. Most of this is painful, and I think that's why I omitted it from the first parts of the tape. But our main objective was when we would go into one of the landings that we had, all these islands that I've mentioned before. Our objective was to get in, secure the beachhead, and protect airstrips or set up an airstrip. And our machine guns were the defense that we had, and then the 40 millimeter and 90 millimeter guns for the anti-aircraft. Well, when we would land, you couldn't carry these big 50 caliber machine guns because they were water cooled and they weighed way too much to try and carry in pieces and set them up because they were on a big steel tripod. And so we would land, I'd either have a 30 caliber air cooled machine gun or I would have a Browning 45 caliber submachine gun until we got secured enough so that our equipment could be moved in behind us. As it didn't take, there was such a good coordination. I mean, it's hard to understand that being in the Army, and you always say, boy, they don't know nothing. But when it came time for when we made our landings, all they had to do was just get about 100 feet on that beach, and they start bringing our equipment in, and then we could set up from there, because the 30 caliber machine guns were not near as powerful or could fire as far as what the 50s could. But anyhow, after we would land, then we would set up our perimeters and get to be doing what we were supposed to. When we would get the water-cooled guns in, we would usually dig a pit so that the gun could sit in, and it was about 3.5 feet deep, so that the barrel would stick above the ground, and you could shoot for the airplanes coming in at you. And as I said before, there was certain parts of that gun that you could modify so you could drop it down and shoot lower than what you were supposed to. Learned this from an old Army buddy. And as you would get set, it was the main objective, I think, of the gun commander or the machine gunner to teach the other fellows that were with you. You had what they called a water chest operator and a machine gun, the ammunition handler, and then the gunner. Well, the gunner was in charge, and he would tell these other two fellows how to protect themselves when you were in that pit. But they always seemed to know better than the other guy. And this is where a lot of the casualties came about, because they would not listen to what they were told to do. I lost my first man when we landed on the Gilberts, I think it was. We had just got our position set up. We had just established a beachhead where you could hold something. And this kid he just would not listen. He would not listen at all to nothing. And I even had to knock him down one time because he was on the wrong side of the hole. And finally you get so caught up in what you're doing, trying to protect yourself and make room for all these other troops coming in. And you're supposed to be doing your job, so you forget about the other two guys because you're concentrating on shooting that gun. Well, he got hit because he was in the wrong place, and he fell on top of me. And it I ran out of tape there. So, let's see. Well, I had just gotten so sick after that kid laying on top of me, and the first dead man I'd really been that close to. I'd seen other ones killed, even up in the Aleutians, but nothing like this. And you almost grow to be like your brothers when you're in where there's a three-man operation and one has to depend upon the other. And after I lost him and we finally got our beachhead established, our company commander come over to me and says that because I was just so ornery, nobody could get close to me. I was so mad at what had happened because it was not something that I had done. It was something that this kid just was. He was stupid for doing what he had done, and you get so angry. So, your people, when you got the three men on a machine gun, it's not hard to just go. You got to go. You can't say, "Well, I'm going to go to this outfit, and I'm going to pick out a guy here, and we're going to go." That's not the way you do it. You bring your crew up with you. You work together, just like a family. So the captain had told me, he said, well, after we had secured where we were at, he says that he's going to send me back for R&R because I was so miserable, couldn't talk to nobody and nobody could talk to me. So they sent me back to Oahu, and first they said I was on R&R, which is rest and relaxation, which was a lie. I didn't know it at the time, but I thought they were being nice to me. But as soon as I got to Oahu, I went on the other side of the island and had a bunch of recruits that needed some training, and that's what I was doing. And you know, I was in such a trance when all this had transpired, and I thought, boy, I'm not getting too much rest and relaxation here. But as I was working with these new recruits, and you figure out, boy, some of these are some pretty sharp kids. Well, because of my experience, you pick out these kids that you think are going to work with you. When I say kids, I mean, I was nothing but a kid myself, but as far as experience was concerned, I was an old man to these kids that were just coming in. They were nothing, but they had just been in the service for a couple of months. So you pick out the better ones that you think, and you concentrate on them because you know that when they leave Oahu, they're going to have to go out in the field. And the more you can train these kids and show them what to do and how to behave, the better off they're going to be. They're going to live longer, and possibly they can train their gun crew that they're out on. So, I don't know, I was there, I think it was a little over 2 weeks. And I came back and I had, I think there was eight replacement people that came back with me. We flew in on a B-24, it's the bomber, and came back and we landed at the Gilberts where we started out there. As soon as we landed, but right back to my old outfit, that's where they shipped me. But I had two men from the ones I had just trained. They sent two of those with me. And my old ammunition handler, they didn't think that he was going to cut the mustard. So they replaced him, and I had two new men, which I had just been training with. So while we were still on the Gilbert, as soon as you get a place secured, your best well, I don't know what you'd say, objective or observations or what it is, you keep going with the people you have so that I know if he's going to eat soup today, what he's going to do, and the other guy knows that if I cross my eyes, he knows how mad I am. So you kind of work together. And these two men I had gotten, because I had trained them on Oahu, they fit right into what I thought was going to be a good crew. And by golly, we trained and trained and trained. Finally, they said, well, time to move on. We had gotten Gilbert's all situated. Well, away we go. So they loaded us up and got aboard these ships. Whenever we would leave, they would always take our gear and put it onto one of these troop ships or one of the big Navy ships, and we would just go with what they call just, you'd wear fatigues. You had a couple changes of clothes for underwear and that, but you didn't have too much. You carried on your back, and you had your blanket roll and your half of what they called a shelter half, which was half of a pup tent. And this is what you landed with. And after you got to where you were going, you kind of even discarded that because you didn't want to carry that thing around while you were doing what you had to do to try and secure a beachhead. So most of the time we were there, you just had what was on your back, period. So after we got into the Marshalls, we had the same thing when we landed there. You land, you establish a beachhead, they bring in your equipment, we set up our guns, dug our pits so that you had some protection. And my thing was all when these guys were working with me, the water chest operator and the ammunition handler, they were always told that while me being the gunner, whichever way my barrel was pointing, they would get underneath on that side of the pit you had dug for the gun, because that meant that all incoming fire was coming from where my barrel was pointing. And that was the safest for them, because if you draw a straight line, put a circle in a piece of paper and show where that airplane is coming in shooting at you, he's going to go to the back end of that pit, not to the front. So if those two guys were at the front of the pit where they belong, they had a lot lesser chance of being hit than if they were sitting in the back end of that pit where they could try and watch what was going on. And I don't know if it's human nature or what, but this is what everybody wanted to do. They wanted to see where you were shooting. It was bad enough that I had to be shooting where this stuff was coming from. But lo and behold, we were on the Marshalls, I don't know, maybe 10 days, and we got a surprise attack. We thought we had the place secured, and we got a surprise attack just at dusk. And we all scrambled and got out to our pits. First thing you did, you know where they're coming, because they always say bogey at 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, whatever. So you know which way you got to look for the airplanes that are coming in at you. And as soon as we got in that pit, the first thing I told them was, follow the barrel, follow the barrel. And this was the bunch that I just, trained in Oahu. No, they did not want to listen. All he did, yep, was, so he stood up. I lost 2 men that day. And I thought maybe I'm a jinx. So I went and talked to the captain, and I told him, I said, maybe I got to go on the 40s instead of the 50s. I said, maybe I ought to get onto that 40 millimeter. And he said, no, you're doing all right. He says, they just won't learn. But you don't want to lose people like that all the time. I mean, it could have been me, could have been anybody. But, well, to tell the reason why I was more protected than these fellows were in the gun pit was because on the machine gun there is a V-shaped piece of iron that protects you from your knees to your head. And that's where you're firing into the opponent, and if a bullet would hit it, it would glance off because it was shaped like a V. If you had a direct hit from a higher, like if you had a 40 or a 90 that would shoot and hit you, it probably would blow the gun and you and everything else out of that hole. But that isn't what was firing at us. Usually, it was just from the fighter planes coming in. They would strafe at you, so when they would come in, they would hit that V, and the bullets would ricochet off from it, so you were kind of protected. And that's why you always told your people that were working with you to always stay on the side of where the barrel is, and they would have a much better chance of surviving. But like I said earlier, they can't do that. They got to watch and see what you're doing. Well, you don't get to watch too much because you're dead. So instead of leaving to go back for what they called R&R, my captain told me, he says that they're going to send me back. And I said, no, I said, I'm going to stay right here. I said, and find out if we can't train somebody that's here with us. I said, get somebody off of one of them 40s or something to see what we can do with them, because they were more out in the open than we were, because they were up even on the ground. They didn't have a pit dug for them because it was a much bigger piece of equipment. And most of that terrain over there is rock. It's not, you don't have too much dirt around you. So what you got to do is, when you come in, you're coming in on the beach, and there usually is sand on the beach, unless you come in where there's a cliff. Well, then it doesn't do you too much good there because you can't get up the cliff. But where you can walk in or come in to bring your equipment in, there's usually sand there. So the first thing you do is you load up bags, even if it's your duffel bag or your backpack or whatever, you load up sand in them so that when you get inside and you get a place secured, they have the jeeps and all this other stuff that's coming in with you right after you. And they see all those sandbags and that, and they know which ones are which. Usually we would spray paint them. Whatever color that you had, you'd spray paint them. And this is what they would go, like I always had orange. So when these guys would come in, they see orange, and they say, well, that's Art's. So they'd bring that over to where our gun pit was, and then if you didn't have a pit dug, if it was all coral or rock there, you would just take these bags and stack them up, and then you would pick rocks that were loose and put them around you so that you always had some protection that you could get up, so that when they did come in, the airplanes that would come in to strafe you, they would hit those rocks or those sandbags, and you would still have that 3.5 foot protection that you could get underneath so that they couldn't get a hold of you. Well, I didn't have any luck recruiting anybody on that one. So we tried working with just a water chest operator, and he doubled up as ammunition handler, and I would do the same thing. I could grab the chest that we had for ammunition, and I could reach over and grab it, flip it up, hook it on the machine gun, because as soon as you start firing, that kid that was pumping the water for you to cool off your gun, he had to do that. Otherwise, your gun got so hot it would bend the barrel, and then you couldn't shoot no place. It just wouldn't work. Well, we were still kind of messing around there on the island. We didn't have nothing other than we had secured what we wanted, and we kept looking and looking to try and find some replacements. Couldn't get none. So finally, we got orders that we were going to move out. And they said, we were going to go, they just said, yeah, you're going north. Well, we didn't go north. What we did is we went west. I think it was Inuitak was our next spot that we went. And we got there, and we had routed out the Japs that were there, and there was enough of the civilians that were on there that we recruited some of those guys to help us after they saw how nice we treated them. They thought, they'd been told by the Japanese that were there that, oh, they're going to kill you, they're going to do this, they're going to, maim you. Well, that was not the case, because when we got there, most of them had been half starved because the Japs that were there, they kept everything for themselves. So we finally recruited enough help that we could do with what we wanted, and by golly, we got a surprise attack from the Japs on there. They sent in 2 ships, and they were going to come in and take over because we only had 1 battery on there, which was about 100 men. And they thought, well, we were going to get them, and they tried landing, but the Americans were just a little stronger and more smart than what the Japs were. The Japs, all they could think of was they're going to die for the emperor, whereas the American soldiers, they said, we aren't going to die. We're going to kill these bastards, and that's all you would ever think. Well, after we had gotten that island secured, then they said that, well, right, the part of that was, I don't know if they called it all the Marianas or if it was just part of something, or it was the Marshalls or what. But we headed for Saipan. We didn't know it at the time, but that's where we wound up. And we got there, and unbeknownst to anybody, after we had secured the beachhead, and we had taken 2 of these natives along with us from Inuitak. And boy, they were such wonderful people, and they would listen. You know, it was hard to converse with them because they didn't speak our language, but they sure did understand sign language, and you could just take your hand and poke down, and boy, those guys, just boom, they were down on the ground. They got out of the way, and you'd always point to them. I'd point at the barrel of the gun and point to that side of the pit, and boy, that as soon as you'd hit them or you'd holler or something, that's where they would go. They would go to that side. Well, after we got that place secured, then they sent in some recruits. I don't know where they came from. Didn't care as long as we had some help. And didn't have any casualty on it for my part. One of the other gun crews had lost a man, but not mine. I survived with the 2 natives that I had. And we got the new help, and we went south, and I think it was Tinian, I think is how they pronounce it. You're going to have to forgive me. This is 50, 55, 60 years ago when all this stuff had happened, and my memory is not the best of what's going on here. But after we got to Saipan, and well, no, we left from Saipan. We went to Tinian, and when we got there, the big push seemed to be that Guam was being one of the strongholds that they had, but we didn't have enough men in our assault force, I guess you'd call it, that we could take them on. There was quite a bit, I imagine 2.5, 3 hours by ship from Tinian down to Guam, but we didn't have the personnel to even think of getting in there to get them. So they moved us out, and on the way they shipped us back towards Truk, which is in the Carolinas. I guess they call it, it's not Carolina, I think it's Caroline, but we always say it was Carolina Island. But they shipped us down there, and when we got there, my goodness, they had so much bombardment, planes flying over, all the Navy ships out there. They were just putting up something terrible. And we got there, and they said, we were going to go in. Well, we got to where we thought, this was a safe place to get in, and our company commander said, well, we're going to debark. So we got off and got in these little boats that they had, headed for shore. And my goodness, they had us zeroed in from that island, wherever we were coming in. They always had those spots pinpointed where you could land to get up onto the beach and get up onto the land. So as the artillery shooting at us got closer and closer, finally the sailors who were driving these boats, they veered off from where they were putting us, and they took us over to where it was like a cliff. Well, when we got over there, then they stopped shooting at us because where they had their guns set up, they couldn't shoot down at us because the cliff was in the way. They were on top of the cliff, and we were down below, and they couldn't drop their guns as low as so they could shoot down to us. So after we got on there, we kind of got together and looked at it, and our company commander came out and he says, well, I think this is a lost cause. So we headed back to our ships, got aboard ships, and we took off from there. And I don't know where they got their orders from, but after we left Truck, then we went to Palau, I think was the island we went to. We got in there, and we didn't have any opposition whatsoever. The Japs had all left from there. There was just some of the civilians there. So we kind of used that as a jumping off spot. And then we got some more recruits. And you always took it didn't take too long to try and teach these guys what you wanted them to do. I was the gunner, and I needed the ammunition handler and a water chest operator. And when you'd go in for a landing, you needed somebody that had a little cool with them and could get in and just carry their rifle, or if they knew how to shoot it, and we had another 30 caliber machine gun, they could take that in, because with a machine gun you can really open up your area in front of you to get rid of the Japs that were there. So after we got going, we thought, well, now what? So orders came out again, and we started headed for the Philippines. And we got there. We were supposed to go to Manila, and when we got there, that was a no-no. You couldn't get anywhere close to that. So they run us around that place out there, I don't know, for 3 days. We went round and round and round. We'd look at an island, and they'd start shooting at you, so they figured, well, you can't get in there. So finally we got into what they call Leyte Gulf. And when we got there, after we got in to the Gulf, there was no way getting out. They had us boxed in there. And that's where I lost 3 more men. It was not a pretty picture. It's something you don't really like to talk about, because when you do, you visualize all the baloney that went on there, that how asinine some of those people were, and it was not somebody you trained, it was somebody that was sent in from someplace else. They didn't have any knowledge of what they were doing, what they were supposed to do, and it just made you so angry. And I guess that's why I was not one of the soldiers that listened too much to orders. When I was in combat, I was the best soldier they ever had. I got I don't know how many recommendations from the company commander. And I didn't get no medals, just they'd pull you out in front of your outfit and they'd say, okay, well, Art Shultz did this, he did that, and he knocked the shit out of this guy or that guy, and you went on to it, and they'd give you a big pat on the back, and then the rest of the troops in your outfit would come over. If we were fortunate enough, after you would get a place secured, usually right behind you was a supply ship that had beer with it. It wasn't that it was the best of beers, but I think most of the beer we got over there was what they call Ballantine Ale. It tasted like somebody made soup out of it and then forgot to put the beer in it. But it was something, there was enough little spirits in it that could kind of lift you up, and if there was no spirits in it, you thought there was, and it kind of built your ego up, and you'd kind of relax a little bit, and then Well, hope to God that you came out of the next one okay. I don't know what else I can tell you, Anna. It's like I say, it's a dirty world, and I just thank God it's all over with, that I didn't have to go anymore. I wouldn't trade what I did for the world. I would never trade that for nothing. But they'd play hell getting me back to do it again. This is just, as God is my witness, they'd never get me back to go back and do what I did before. But I would never say I was ashamed of what I did do. There were some things that were not right. We did a lot of dirty things to the Japs. Japs did a lot of dirty things to us. And like I say, if I had it all over to do again, I'd do the same thing I did. I don't know, you say, well, what do you think of taking somebody's life? Well, at that time and place, you didn't worry about taking somebody else's life. You just says, the hell with you. This is either me or you. And I'm one of the living ones that can say, it was him, not me. I hope this has helped you a little bit. And like I say, if you need any more information, when we get there to see you, you can ask all the questions you want, and I'll sit with you one-on-one, and I'll answer you to the best of my knowledge, and I'll tell you just like it was, who was killed, why, and some of the atrocities that we did to them because we needed to save ourselves. Talk to you again. Bye-bye.